All right, what's up, guys? So I did have a few people reach out to me and ask me because of the high load temperatures, especially in Cinebench in particular, where the CPU is pulling 120 or 125 watts, to go ahead and tear this thing open. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that and replace the thermal compound. I'm going to be using KPx Kingpin Cooling Paste. I do have quite a lot of it still. I'm gonna see how this works. I was going to use the phase change material, but because of the amount of time that it takes usually to get it delivered through eBuy7, I figured I should use something a little bit easier to get your hands on in at least the United States. I'm also happy to use some other stuff later that I won't be recording just because the process is going to be the same. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and use this. If you want to do this yourself, all you'll need is a precision screwdriver kit. I have this one, nothing fancy. Some isopropyl alcohol. I have some 91% here just because I ran out of 99. The higher the percentage, the better, just because it dries faster. And then just some Q-tips to clean off. But otherwise, we're gonna get right into it. We're gonna start taking off the bottom panel here, which is, as I mentioned, 8 Phillips screwdrivers. So I'm gonna go ahead and get started on doing that. And I'm gonna just lay the screws to the side, and I'll call out if there's any specifics that you need to watch out for, such as different screw lengths or things like that that might get you tripped up. And I am doing this blind. I haven't looked at the manual from Lenovo on how to disassemble this, but usually Lenovo devices, especially Legion devices, are pretty straightforward. So we'll see how this goes. And obviously we'll speed up the process, speed up the clip, or go ahead and cut it out if it's not of use or of relevance during this process. So no worries on trying to skim through the video, trying to get rid of any unnecessary things that might not care about or don't need to know. So we'll just get right into it. So that seems to be all 8 screws. We're gonna go ahead and use our pry tool. Last time I started somewhere around here on the rear vents. Let me see if we can see it there. There you go. See if I can get wherever I was before. There we go. Got it. There we go. Now we can start getting the clips off. And I'm gonna just work my way around the device here. Sorry for the poor camera angle, but you guys get the idea. All right, now we got the bottom panel off. Let me get this back in center frame here. All right. So the first thing you're gonna wanna do is disengage that battery there because we don't want anything shorting, and it is interestingly at an angle, and it looks like there's another cable right next to it from maybe the display that's in the way. Not entirely sure. Let me see if I can get this thing off without having to disengage the other cable, which looks like I can. This battery connector seems loose. I wonder what it's connected to. Like, it's not actually, what is? Oh, okay. So there's like a connector stemming from the other side of the board. That's interesting. So it's not held into place. Oh, okay, there we go. That's an interesting, it's like daisy chained. I don't know if you guys can see that, but. All right, so I guess we can just unplug this one then. I wonder what the design idea, I guess it was because they were out of flat board space, so they needed to have it go in at an angle. But got the battery disconnected, so I'm gonna fold and tuck that out of the way here and take a look at the cooling solution. Looks like we got a few pieces of like thermal tape to take off, nothing too crazy. Fan connectors are here and here. I don't know if those, yeah, those do just clip in, so we'll go ahead and take those out next. Okay. Okay, there's one. This one is a little bit tougher of an angle, so I'm sorry if my hands get in the way. There we go. Got the fans unplugged. And then let's start disengaging some of this thermal tape here. I'll probably start with the top. Peel this back. Okay, easy enough. Bend that back a little bit more. Get underneath there. Sorry about that. Okay, so now we can see the entire cooling solution. Looks like we got 5 captive screws and then 1, 2, and then 2 screws, maybe 3. Yeah, there's the third underneath the heat pipe. So hopefully, oh, they might not be connected in the same way the Legion 7 is. So we'll see. We're gonna go ahead and start loosening up the heat sink. So we'll go in reverse order here. We'll start from 5 in the top right. Do a few screws. 4, 3, 2, 1. It looks like this one's not numbered, so I'm going to do this one as the last one. And then I'm going to go back to 5. And the reason why you want to do this is because you don't want to loosen up the pressure on one side of the board the cooling solution too much, just in case, just to make sure you don't warp it as you loosen it on one side. All right, it looks like we've loosened these captive screws enough to start trying to take this off. I'm going to grab another pry tool here just to free it from the thermal paste that's already on there. One moment. Okay, so I just got a standard plastic pry tool here. I'm going to try to find a good area for me to pop this up, which looks like that will work nicely. And be very careful here not to bend the heat sinks, but we're gonna get that off. There's the cooling solution, flip that around. So it actually does look like they're using a similar material as they are in the prior Legion 7 and Legion 5 Pros from 2021. It's very similar in appearance though. It looks like the application on the GPU side was a little uneven, or it cracked from me pulling it off. But we can go ahead and start cleaning this up. And we do see the little XE graphics on the CPU side. I'm gonna lift it up so you guys can see it a little bit better. But I'm gonna go ahead and start cleaning this off. I'm gonna grab a few Q-tips here. And I actually don't bother with the isopropyl alcohol right away. I try to like bunch it up first to try to collect it so I don't spread it unnecessarily. So I kind of just get at it, especially in these Legion devices from the factory. You can kind of just gather it together in a single block and stick it together. I'll make sure to get that up there. There we go. And don't worry too much about trying to get every little drop. This stuff is not conductive from the factory, so it's okay if you lose some on the board or anything like that. It won't short any of your components. It's a little tougher on this side. Okay. Start picking this stuff up. Grab another Q-tip. And then doing some little finer detail cleaning. So for those that want to liquid metal the CPU, it looks like the height between the graphics, the onboard graphics, and the actual CPU die are about the same height. I'm going to switch over to showing the cooling solution to see if there's any like sort of steps to account for height differences. But from the naked eye, I don't see any. But we'll see in a moment here after I'm done cleaning this up. And I'll speed through this. I'm not going to waste your guys' time too much. Pick up the loose paste fragments here. Then again, this doesn't have to be perfect. You don't have to get like every single piece of paste between the SMDs or the traces around the GPU. Or if you're working on an AMD CPU, you don't need to get around all the traces either. But some people are perfectionists and like to. Some people will only do that. So it just really depends on what kind of person you are and if you think it's necessary. But personally, I don't usually bother. So now I'm going to go ahead and clean the dies with some isopropyl alcohol here. Get some applied on my Q-tip. Make it nice and shiny. I'll do the same on the GPU side here. I'll clean up the edges of the die a little bit here. Start gathering some more of this dried up paste. Get that cleaned up. Alrighty. Looks like there's still a few marks on the GPU side that I gotta clean off, so I'm gonna go ahead and do one more round of isopropyl alcohol on it, and then I'm gonna move to cleaning off the heatsink. All right, just for good measure, I'll clean the CPU side a little bit more. Okay. All right, so I'm gonna set this aside for just a moment here. And I'm going to clean the heat pipes and cold plates here from the paper. So in similar fashion, I'm gonna try to pick up the thermal paste dry to try to just gather it all in one piece rather than going at it with the alcohol and spreading it and making it a little harder to clean later. This does seem quite similar to the phase change material that we are very familiar with, as I mentioned. It looks similar and looks like it dries similarly as well. Okay. Get that gathered up here as much as I can. And then the rest I'm gonna just kind of brush off. And don't worry, we're gonna hit this with isopropyl alcohol as well when we're done, just to make sure that there's no particles in between that might interfere with our cooling potential. Okay. Okay. We'll get this side off and nice and clean. Okay. Now let's get some more alcohol and apply it to get this nice and shiny. And the only thing to really be careful of is to not apply too much pressure on one side and like bend the solution, which might inherently bend the cold plates, which are responsible for making contact with the die evenly. So just be aware of that. Make sure you're not pressing too hard on one side or anything. Alrighty. So I'm going to, just because I like to do this, I usually grab a microfiber cloth and just give this a good wipe at the very end to make it nice and clean and shiny. You don't have to do this. Some people might say this is probably a bad thing to do. I've never had any issues doing this. It just makes it look a little nicer. Okay, we're gonna grab the laptop here in a second. Get that back in frame. So we're gonna actually apply our thermal compound now. So I'm always torn between if I manually spread the paste or not, because there's no integrated heat spreader like there is on a desktop. People like Bob of all trades, who now works for electronics, usually just applies it in a line and then an X on GPUs. If it's a larger die, since this is a 3060, it's a little bit thinner of a die when you're looking at it top down, like vertically. So I'm going to do a line on the CPU and GPU, and then make sure when I'm screwing on the cooling solution, I make sure I go slow and do a few turns at a time per screw. So there's the GPU. And I'm sorry if my hand blocks this a little bit, but here's the CPU. I'm gonna just go in a straight line across all the way, even through the graphics. I'll do a little bit extra there just in case on the graphics. Okay. So we'll go ahead and grab our cooling solution. And make sure we put this on evenly and flatly and not force it on one side and finagle it and potentially introduce some air bubbles. So I recommend grabbing it like this from the sides here, trying to line up the screws like just barely above them. And I apologize if I'm a little shaky here. This is, again, the first time I've taken apart this specific device, so this is all blind. Okay, that seems pretty good. Now what you're gonna wanna do is do 1 to 2 screws, and when I say that, like 1 twist basically of your wrist, going in order, 1 to, in this case, I'll mark this as 6. So I'll just go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 6. 1, 2, and so on. This way we get a nice flat mount. It's a little tedious, but it does ensure, especially if you're using something like liquid metal, which is very thin, you want to make sure you do this, because you can get very crazy wonky core deltas if you don't. Where one temperature of one core will be at like 78 or 80 degrees, and the other one's at like throttling or 95, which is obviously not good for the long-term health of the processor. Okay, I'm gonna start tightening these all the way. 1 is done, 2 is done. 3 had a few more extra turns, which is fine. 4 is done. 5 and 6. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and put this tape back. This tape, I believe, went above the RAM shield like this. So we'll go ahead and put that back. It's not going to look as clean as it did the first time, but it's quite fine. And then we're going to plug in the fans, which might be a little hard for me because these are very tiny and I don't have small fingers, but I'm going to do my best here. Just kind of try to get them flat against the board and slide them in. Okay, left one is in. And then we're going to plug in the right one. Well, I guess technically it's the left one once you invert the device, but it's the right one from us, and it's marked as right. Alrighty, so I'm gonna just make sure these are firmly seated, which they do seem they are. And I'm gonna plug the battery back in, which is going to be a little interesting because of this weird daisy chain connector that makes it go at an angle, but it shouldn't be too hard. Okay, that's plugged back in. I'm gonna try to get this back at an angle like it was before, like that. And we're gonna get the bottom panel back on and do some more thermal testing. Overall, I will say that wasn't too bad. Pretty quick, actually, especially because you don't have to unscrew and take out the fans. So I actually unplugged them and plugged them in for really no reason, which makes it even easier now that I think about it. Okay, so we'll get this back on. And you might hear some of the clips engaging because it's very hard to actually get all of the clips perfectly aligned already. But as I screw it in, they'll engage where I missed. Okay. Get these 8 Phillips screws back in and we'll be good to go. And again, if you hear some random pops as I screw these in, that's just because some of the clips that I might not have gotten while I was trying to put the bottom panel on just by hand, you'll hear some popping, and that's totally normal as you tighten these screws. Don't worry too much about it. You're not breaking anything, or the screw's not going through the chassis like I've seen on some Asus devices. There it is. And again, apologies if my hand has blocked some of the view, but there really isn't an easy way of filming this perspective to try to make it as straightforward and easy to follow along if you were to do this yourself with the same kind of top-down view. But hopefully you guys found this helpful or somewhat helpful. I know it's not exactly the highest of quality, but I do appreciate you guys sticking around. Alrighty, we should be good to go. I'm gonna clean this up real quick here. This thing definitely picks up fingerprints. All right, the only thing left to do is make sure that it turns on. Make sure we didn't short anything, but it's very unlikely that we did. All right, so it does power on, and we do have a splash screen. So I will be back with some thermal testing and results to see if the KPx performs any better than the stock thermal compound. But as always, thank you for watching, and be back shortly.